This episode is dedicated to Olivia, Nicole, Madeline, Emma, and Luke. Hey there, this is Women on the Brink. I'm your host, Chris Jeffrey, a registered acupuncturist and wellness advisor with a passion for helping women live happier and more balanced lives. When I'm away from work, I'm usually outside in nature, either walking the seawall or I'm hiking in the mountains. And like many of you, my life has been filled with moments of hardship, some that I thought I couldn't overcome and really left me questioning my own strength. But through these challenges, I discovered resilience, courage, and a renewed sense of purpose. So I'm here to share not just my journey, but the lessons I've learned, and to remind you that no matter what obstacles come your way, there's always a path forward. And just to let you know, this podcast is not prescriptive. It's an offering. So please take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Before we begin today's episode, the topic of shame, I want to just take a moment to honor the land, the people, and the ancestors who've come before us. I'm recording this podcast on the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh people who have cared for and stewarded these lands for thousands of years. And I want to acknowledge their ongoing presence and resilience and wisdom. And this acknowledgement isn't just a formality, it's an act of truth-telling because colonialism and systemic oppression caused immeasurable harm, not just to the land itself, but to the people who belong to it. For so many Indigenous people, including many of my Métis friends and family, shame around identity was deliberately created. And it was planted through policies that erased languages, cultures, and family connections. And it was enforced through violence, through silence, and through the stripping away of dignity. And that shame was never ours to carry. And, this is where I also recognize the threads of shame in my own story. So for me, it's shown up in the form of scarcity of love, scarcity of money, scarcity of measuring up. And, I've really carried those stories for a lot of my life. And I know they weren't born in me. They weren't born with me. They were inherited. They were passed down quietly through the women who came before me because I believe many of them never had the chance to release their shame. And just like my ancestors, Indigenous people and many in BIPOC communities have carried the weight of stories that were imposed on them, not chosen by them. So when I speak about shame today, I hold both. I hold my personal journey and the collective journeys of those who have been told for generations that they don't measure up or belong. And I'm really doing this work not only to heal my own shame, but I'm doing it for my daughters and my niece and my nephew, and even the grandchildren who aren't here yet. And I also do it for my ancestors because I believe the women who came before me would want me to break the cycle and to live free of the shame that they never had the chance to shed. So I just want to take a moment here to take a deep breath together and really just allow your body to soften and allow your heart to settle. And we're going to step into this conversation about shame. So welcome back to Women on the Brink. And as I mentioned, we're diving into something deeper than fear, something that often keeps us small and silent and disconnected from our true potential, and that is shame. And, I often talk about my fears as being the things that hold me back from my dreams. But if I'm really honest, shame is the heavier weight, I think, because fear says, what if I fail? But shame says, who do you think you are? It doesn't just question my actions, it questions my very worth. And shame is sneaky. It weaves itself into our identity and makes us believe that something about us is broken or unworthy or maybe even just too much. And unlike fear, which usually points to an external risk like, fear of rejection or fear of failure. Shame is internal. Shame convinces us that we are the risk. And that's why shame is so powerful. It doesn't just hold us back, it convinces us that we shouldn't even try. So for me, my shame often showed up as scarcity, as I said. Scarcity of love, scarcity of money, scarcity of measuring up. I remember times when I felt like love had to be earned, and that if I wasn't perfect enough or quiet enough or strong enough, then I wasn't worthy of being chosen or cared for. And I even remember times when money felt impossible to hold on to, like I had some hidden flaw that made abundance belong to everyone else, but not to me. And in work or in relationships, there were so many moments where I thought, no matter what I achieved, I still wouldn't measure up. And that shame, it turns life into a constant audition, and the prize of belonging or being enough is always out of reach. Does that make sense? So for me, cleaning up this shame has meant looking inward instead of outward. Scarcity isn't about what's happening outside of us, it's a mirror of what's happening internally. So when I was living in that scarcity mindset, I carried a belief that I wasn't enough, that I had to constantly strive and prove myself or control every outcome to be worthy. And money felt scarce because I feared it would never be lasting. Love felt scarce because the people I was seeking it from, whether it was a family member, a partner, or mentors, they never made me feel like I deserved it. And their silence or their criticism or their withholding didn't just create a longing, it mirrored back the shame I was already carrying. And that really reinforced the belief that I wasn't enough. So opportunities felt scarce because I doubted my own abilities. And so scarcity in this sense was a reflection of that internal voice of shame. So cleaning this shame has meant rewiring that whole internal dialogue. So with money, I began noticing where my beliefs were rooted. And often that was in fear or it was inherited in stories that were passed on. And so I had to ask myself, like, do I really believe that I am worthy of abundance? So I started practicing gratitude for what I did have, and then started making steps toward inviting more flow of receiving rather than clinging or hoarding or chasing it. And gradually, money has become less of a judgment and more of an energy tool and a reflection of what I can create and steward rather than a measure of my own self worth. With love, the work ran even deeper, I think. I had to confront the roots of shame I carried, the belief that I was unlovable or never enough in my relationships. And I began intentionally giving myself the love I'd been looking for from other people. And at the same time, really paying attention to when I found myself settling or shrinking or dimming my light out of fear. And that wasn't only in my relationships, that was in all areas of my life. And so as I continue to heal these internal wounds, I'm realizing that the love I once longed for from others matters less. And now, when I'm centered in my own self-worth, I genuinely like who I am. And that's all that truly matters, right? And I think that people are drawn to me because I'm authentic and I'm not people pleasing or trying to be perfect anymore. And the great thing to all of this is that my boundaries around who I allow in are clearer and stronger. And I think that really protects the sense of self I've worked really hard to cultivate. And I think about some of the clients I've worked with who apologize when they show any sign of shame or weakness. And, their instinct is to say, I'm sorry. And that's shame speaking when we're apologizing for being human and having those feelings. And when they finally begin to see themselves with compassion, a new door opens and the shame loses its power, and people can actually be in their lives rather than performing in it. And this shame of mine isn't just unique to Indigenous people. I mean, I've heard Black, Asian, and immigrant women talk about being told their skin tone, their hair, their accents, or their traditions made them less than. And these are not individual failures. They're wounds that are handed down by systems of oppression. And when we hear these stories, we can see that it's the same thread weaving through the quiet, powerful voice of shame that says you don't measure up and you don't belong. And in fact, let's face it, we're witnessing this in the United States right now in very visible and systemic ways. Laws in several states restrict how race and identity and history can be taught in schools, even banning or limiting discussions on critical racial theory or anything that makes students feel shame or guilt based on their race or history. And rollbacks of civil rights protections and diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives are reinforcing the message that marginalized communities have to work harder to prove themselves or adapt to a system that isn't designed to value them. And I don't know if you remember the Supreme Court's decision in 2023 to remove race-based affirmative action in so many college admissions sent the same subtle but painful message that identity and heritage and lived experience can be a barrier rather than a bridge. What the hell? We are really, really moving backwards. So these very policies reinforce shame at both individual and collective levels. And honestly, that's what the powers that be want. It's the way to control, right? So we all have to do our part in shifting these outdated ways of thinking, because healing shame isn't just about us as individuals. I've realized I have to do this work, not only for myself, but as I said, those who follow, my daughters, my niece and nephew, and the grandchildren who are not quite here yet. I want them to inherit a story of abundance and not scarcity. And I want them to know that they don't have to audition for love or prove their worth. It's already theirs. And I also do this for the women who came before me, my grandmothers, my great-grandmothers, the women who endured so much, who carried heavy loads of silence and survival. I know that they would want me to live free of the shame that they never had the chance to shed. And my version of releasing the shame isn't about fighting it with force. In fact, fighting usually makes it dig in deeper. It's really about meeting it with compassion, where shame says, you're unworthy. Compassion just responds with, you're just being human. And being human means imperfection, mistakes, growth, and yes, sometimes falling flat on your face. But none of those things erase your worth. And here's the good news, when shame begins to unravel, space opens up inside of us. Space for that courage and creativity and for joy that we're all striving for. And it's like finally clearing fog off of a mirror. You get to see yourself clearly for the first time. And the truth is, shame was never who we are. It was always a distortion. And without it, we're free to take up space, to pursue our dreams, and to claim the lives we've always deserved. So if you're listening today and you recognize shame's voice in your story, I just want to leave you with this. You are not your shame, and you are not unworthy. You're a whole, messy, luminous human being, and that's exactly who the world needs you to be. And when we do this work for ourselves, we don't just heal one life, we heal generations, both past and future. And we also take part in a collective healing that creates space for communities who've carried very heavy burdens of shame to rise to their truth and their beauty. So thank you for joining me on Women on the Brink. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your reflections. So share them with me, and let's keep breaking the silence around shame so we can create space for all of us to rise. Thanks for joining, and I want you to know that this isn't just a podcast, this is a movement. So share this information with your friends, and let's go, ladies.